Hello again, everyone. This is Jon Pettit, producing the recording from the presentation I delivered to you a couple of weeks ago. The presentation won't go on as long as the session did with you. I'm going to condense this into about 10 minutes. So appreciate you sticking with us. Hopefully you'll be able to take some actions away and it will refresh your memory from the session that we had. That's a very encouraging feedback from you all. So I'm glad that you found it useful, and hopefully you've all put your plans into action. But if not, then there's a gentle reminder as we move forward now. As we said previously, this is all about getting a job, but not any job, the job that you really want. And so we encourage during the session to think of a dream job. That dream job is attainable. There's no reason why you can't get the job that you really want following your training this year. So the context, I think we can skirt over this piece. I'm glad you attended. It shows that you were serious about your job hunting and the task in front of you. And as we talked about, February, well, actually should be January really, is the time to swing into action with a plan for getting that job. The longer you wait, the harder it becomes. The longer you wait, the fewer jobs are around. The longer you wait, the less chance there is of getting the job that you want. So we found out that one person in the room had a job, did very well. A couple of you had interviews, a few more had applied for a job, a few more were looking. Not everyone was interview ready, but also as well, those bottom two were very important. A few of you thought there were jobs available at your current placement school, but obviously no one had signed that contract. The danger is, we've all seen it and heard of it before, is that when you're doing well or when you're in a school, people in your department will always whisper about the potential of so-and-so leaving. I think there's going to be a job, you're doing really well, we think that you'd fit in really well here. The tendency is from you following that is to think, well, I like it here, I'd like to work here, so let's hold on until that resignation comes and until I can sign a contract and start. In reality, lots of times that doesn't happen. It doesn't happen because the person doesn't leave. It doesn't happen because they go through a formal interview process and sometimes that person doesn't get offered the job. So it's a dangerous tactic. If you say to them, I would love to work here, but I've got to continue my job search until a job is offered or until I sign a contract, sometimes that may well force their hand, may even promote someone to resign earlier than anticipated, but ultimately you have to put yourself first. You have to keep searching for that job. This is the crux of the whole presentation. Who's got a plan? So we found out actually that not that many of you had got a plan, or if you had, you didn't realise you had one. It's all about timescales. It's all about your dream job, where you want to teach, state or independent. Well, actually, let's go back just a touch. The state and independent argument, should you be applying for both? If you've trained in state, should you go into independent to do your induction year? Do they support induction years? Not every independent school will. But it's important that you work this out for yourself. Some of you may well think you want to work in independent schools, go for an interview and change your mind, or vice versa into state schools. The time to make those decisions, or the time to experiment, is now rather than leaving it to the last minute. As I said to you previously, I had a very early interview in my PGCE year. In fact, I had two early interviews, one state and one independent. I cocked up my state school interview. I didn't like my independent school experience, and very early on that meant that I was able to tailor my plan to finding the right state school for me. I was very clear I wanted a rugby school, a state school, not in a major city, and that was enabled me to focus my attention on finding a school that was right for me. But how long do you look for that dream job? This is the Russian roulette. This is the game of Russian roulette that we spoke about during our session. I can't answer this one. This is down to you, how desperate you are to sign that contract and say you've got a job for September, or how long you're willing to ride it out until you do find that perfect job. If you interview now and you're offered and accept a job, what happens 3 months down the line when your dream job comes up? Or you may be lucky and interview and accept a job that is your dream job now. But that often doesn't happen. So do you have a plan B, C, D, etc.? What compromises am I willing to take? Well, if some of you are willing to hold on for that dream job and that dream job doesn't materialize, there are compromises. There are fallbacks for you from September onwards. Supply, for example, is one. Short-term contracts up to a term can also help you, or if you're in a supply contract for a term, can help you chip away at your NQT year. But ultimately, you all want jobs, or the majority of you will want jobs for September. So we have to think about at what times do I therefore broaden my horizons with my search, broaden my horizons in terms of looking for state or independent schools, or from a single sex to co-ed, etc. And it's working out at what time periods you trigger those compromises to kick in. So a tool which we introduced was the Edubase research tool from the Department of Education. So you can click in there, it's pretty self-explanatory, use that link, you can click in, you can find schools within a postcode radius, and you can bring up their details. And as we've talked about in the session, once you've got the details, what are you going to do with them? If they're your dream schools, if I want to work within a 10-mile radius of, let's say, Hertford, in Hertfordshire, then what am I going to do when I've got all that information? Well, my advice to you is to be proactive. Do your research on the schools. All the schools within a 10-mile radius aren't always going to be your plan A schools, so have a look. Look at the schools, what's the website look like, Ofsted, word of mouth, and Google News in there as well, so you can find out sometimes some interesting or terrifying things about some schools that may promote your interest or make you look over them and decide they're not the school for you. CVs are becoming defunct in school application processes. Schools are encouraged to use application forms purely for safeguarding reasons, and also for to give everything as a level playing field. But CVs aren't defunct as and when you want to make a first impression to a school or to a future employer, as well as a covering letter. So my advice is, once you've narrowed down those schools that you want to approach, schools that you think are your dream schools or the schools that you would like to teach in, is to print off a copy of your CV, put a covering letter in there, find out who the head teacher is, and pop it in an envelope and send it in via post. The little tip that we used is, if you write private and confidential on the front, then the head's PA, or the head's gatekeeper as we call them, won't pick up that letter and open it on their behalf and think, oh, another CV, I'm going to pop it in the bin. It will go straight to the head teacher, who will open it, and it's your job to make your CV and your covering letter irresistible to them. And even if they haven't got a vacancy at the school at that time, encourage them to keep hold of your details, your CV and your letter, in order to pop you on file for any future use when a vacancy does arise at the school. As we talked about, schools can often recruit year on year between 5 and 25% of its teaching staff. And at Beal, when we talked about there being 200 members of staff, if you do the maths, that's a lot of interviews, a lot of recruitment, and recruitment is a headache for schools. When you've sent that in, follow it up. Maybe you do speak to the head's PA, but try to speak to the head. Did you receive my CV and covering letter? Are there any vacancies coming up? Could I come in for a look around? Job alerts are your way of saving time. On our site, futureactive.co.uk, we have a job alert facility, as do a lot, if not all, modern day job boards or recruitment websites. It takes some time to set these up, but once you've done so and you've put the type of school you want to work in, the type of area that you're interested in, the type of jobs that you're interested in, then the jobs will be emailed to you. It takes time to save time, but I'd encourage you all just to spend an hour or two signing up to the relevant websites and getting those job alerts back to you. A theme that recurred during the presentation was being aware of deadlines and being cautious when working to them. What that means is that recruitment is often done early, before deadlines. If there's an application deadline, get yours in as soon as possible. Don't wait till the last minute. Particularly the longer we go through the school year, the more schools will become panicky about making sure they have a full teaching cohort from September. So sometimes heads rip up the rule book or break the rules, get people in early, don't go to formal interview process. They often appoint after school interviews, chats, referrals from friends of friends, etc. So please beware of deadlines. So we've got the obvious and the not so obvious. As we said, the obvious and signing up for job alerts is a no-brainer, but the not so obvious, we want to be looking at boroughs, local authorities and county websites. As we said, the day that I delivered the presentation in Redbridge, there were a lot of jobs, not only for April but also for September. So September jobs are being advertised now, particularly in the independent sector, who have to recruit earlier than the state. But there's Redbridge's job board. Why do schools advertise on there? Because it's free, and the others, Test, Guardian, etc., aren't. It can cost over £5,000 for an advert in the TES, and in a modern day of education austerity as well as austerity across our society, schools have to take advantage of cost cutting where. So, as we mentioned earlier, that schools use application forms to conduct their recruitment, and application forms often differ from county to county, local authority to local authority, but they will still require pretty much the same information, maybe just recorded in a different form. So if you want to teach in one particular area, one particular county, get a hold of the county application form and fill it in. Fill it in now, even if you're not applying for a job, because you will realise what information you need to put on there, and it will also allow you to practice filling one in. That may sound basic, obvious, but the practicing of an application form is very, very important. As we discussed during the session, the example was given that during a deputy head's application process, one was deputy principal. One application was thrown out because the second word of principal was spelt wrong. So make sure you've got your house in order, you've got the information you need, and someone can check through your spelling, your grammar, and the information that you have put on the application. Also, it's very important to prepare your referees. Again, this is going back to that avoiding or being aware of deadlines. Tardy references do not help the application process. So if your referees are prepared, someone from the school, the MAT, which will probably be Lorna, writing for the PE, for example, and be Lorna, or your professional tutor be writing your reference, but also one of your school mentors. So if you've been in 2 schools, maybe pick the mentor that's going to give you the most glowing reference and prepare them. Can you write me a reference? Can you have it ready? And if requested, please, can you submit it as soon as you possibly can? I'm not going to go into too much detail on this one because this could actually take up a whole session, but make yourself invisible, sort yourself out online. Modern day phenomenon because of social media and internet is, as soon as you receive an application, you can Google someone and find out all about them. Often those first impressions aren't correct, they're not always positive, and therefore not always going to do you any favours. In terms of keep checking your emails, you should be on them every day. When you are applying for jobs and you're using emails, or when you've signed up for job alerts, check your emails every single day. Simply because you may miss an interview request. Sometimes, particularly again, the longer we go through the school year, interview requests come 24 hours or 48 hours with 48 hours notice. But also as well, one important thing that I haven't put in here is the moment you start applying for jobs and the moment you've submitted application forms with your contact details on, be prepared to be contacted by any means, even on the phone. So every time you pick up your mobile and you see a number that you don't recognise, be professional when you answer the phone, because the other end of that phone may be your future head teacher, your future employer. So again, it's important if you can make great first impressions. Once you've done all that, now you're interview ready, and now you're ready to accelerate your progress at the moment that you see a job advert or job vacancy that you like, and that you're not scrabbling around to gather information before the deadline. As we talked about, you're getting your information together, you're getting your application. So we mentioned earlier an informal visit. So even if you are speculatively applying for a job, as we mentioned when you're sending your CV and your covering letter in, it's a case of can you go for an informal visit? They're often encouraged. And this means that you can make a great first impression to your head teacher, a first impression that you may not be able to make when there are other people around who are attending interviews as well. A first impression that is just between you and one other person. And you can make that impression by doing your research, by walking around the school, commenting on the Ofsted report, commenting on the environment, the school development plan if it's available on the website, etc. And then if there is that application, you get it in as soon as possible. Once again, we're checking to see, has it been received? Call and ask. You may well go through to a head's PA. You may even speak to a head teacher if it's in a smaller school. But double check. It all makes you look professional, well prepared and proactive. And then you can start doing this now, start preparing interview scenarios. Schools interview on a scenario basis, which means that they will say, can you tell me an example of when you, etc., etc. So this could do with safeguarding, it could be to do with your subject knowledge, but think about what type of answers you will give to the questions, and the answers will be scenario based. So think of scenarios that you've gone through in your training so far. And what about preparing general questions? Well, in terms of preparing those questions, my advice is always to write those questions down on a notepad and pen and take them with you, because when you finish that interview, you'll breathe a big sigh of relief thinking, well, thank God that's over. And then when the question comes, do you have any questions for us? you will be able to confidently refer to your notes without going completely blank and just wanting to get out of the room. So again, it shows you're proactive, it shows you're prepared, and it shows you are all good traits for a teacher. The be-all and end-alls that schools want to like you. They want to be able to recruit the first person they see. They want them to be perfect. They're not interested in interviewing a dozen people, but they obviously won't accept and employ someone who is substandard. So be confident that they want to like you. As we mentioned a minute ago, is taking notes with you, do your research, and don't be afraid, particularly in informal parts of the day, to make them aware that you've done your research. Dropping in some comments about your Ofsted report. I can see on the website that you've done this, I can see in the news that you've done this, and they can come through, that information can come through in informal times. Keep it simple and sincere. That's the KISS principle. Well planned, pacey, progressive and fun. But have a contingency plan. What happens if your plan A goes wrong? Have a plan B and plan C as a backup. What happens if you haven't got the equipment you need? You're not in the room you thought you were in. You need to be able to seamlessly transition. And part of that is being reflective after the lesson, but not overly critical. As we mentioned, a sign of an outstanding teacher is a sign of someone who will recognise when they have and haven't taught an outstanding lesson. And if you think you've taught an outstanding lesson but the school don't, then there's an issue. So be reflective and say, well, actually, if I were to do this again, I would do this, this, and this differently. During the interview, again, is thinking of those scenarios, but referring to the job spec and making sure that you've asked the questions that you want answered, because you want to know that are you teaching a GCSE group? Have you got A-level groups? Am I a form tutor? What year group would you think I'll be a form tutor for? Will I be going on any school trips, etc.? And all this is building up a huge picture of the job as to whether it's your dream job or whether a job that you would accept, because during the day, if you're there and you're there throughout the day, they may cut from 6 down to 3 at lunchtime. And if you're still there and they ask you, are you still interested in this job? And your answer is yes, all the way through, they will expect you to accept the job offer at the end of the day. So if it is offered to you, they expect you to say yes there and then. Some schools will allow you to go away and think about it. The reason for this is because they want to get the recruitment done and dusted. That doesn't mean to say they're cutting corners. It means that they've made some prompt decisions during the day. They're being proactive. They've got people there at the end of the day that they like and that they want to be there, and that because they're still there, they're expecting them to say yes if a job is offered. If you say, well, I'd like to go away and think about it, some head teachers will say, no, I'm sorry, we need an answer. And some teachers will say, okay, I'll give you overnight, and will not let the other 2 candidates go, for example. But sometimes if you say yes, they'll shake your hand and the job offer will be, the letter will be in the post the very next day. Sometimes if you say no, they'll offer it to the next person in line. So even if you're still there at the end of the day and you're not called into the head teacher's office straight away, don't despair, because there may still be a job offer on the table. Obviously no questions from you now, but we had a good question session. Hopefully you found this refreshing in terms of revisiting the information that we gave during that. I realise now I've gone on for nearly 25 minutes, so my timekeeping is not good. Let's hope yours is better when you attend an interview. But all I'd like to say is good luck. If you want any help or advice, don't hesitate to give me a call, email me your CV, email me any questions, or speak to any one of our recruitment team who are very knowledgeable. But wishing you all the very best of luck in your ongoing career. Thank you.